Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram Language Design Review, part of our incremental language development series. We have a few different items. Let's start off with AssociationComap.
Yep. So this is a function we talked about last time. Ian has gone ahead and implemented a prototype version, which is live in that prototype build. And in doing so, we came across a design question, which is what should a association comap do with an association as the first argument? And if we mirror what association map does,
which is stupid.
Yeah, which is kind of silly. The results aren't particularly useful, and it's not guaranteed to give a valid association. So
Yeah, I
Jose
think it doesn't make sense. It should just apply it to that. So if I did a comap, if I take this association here, and I do a comap of that association onto X, that's what I get.
Yep.
So you're proposing, and if I do an association map of F, ABC, I get that. Okay.
Right. But if you do F, try F of, key of the association, key 1 goes to val 1, key 2 goes to val 2.
Sorry, this association map on an
Yep.
association.
Yep,
Yes.
on the same association as before.
Now I'm very confused. What the heck is that?
Can you use the same key 1, val 1 association?
Yeah, copy the association from in of 1 rather than having used the output.
Why?
Because then it'll be
easier.
So
association map,
yeah.
It maps F over the normal list form of the association and then applies association to the result, which does not necessarily give an association queue object.
right, which is stupid. And we've talked about it before in LCC. And we actually went looking at whether people use this. And then it's not super common. And actually, a significant fraction of the cases when they do this, they really should just be using map rather than association map because they really just want to apply F to the value. So I'm thinking, right, the only example for the association case that is on the documentation page is reverse. So I'm thinking maybe I don't think we can just remove it, although that would be ideal, but maybe we should just de-document association map of working on associations, in which case we don't really need association comap to work on associations either.
Just a minute.
Right. There's examples for that design question in the next bullet point.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Could you okay, sorry. What is your proposal?
So there are two proposals. One which is low risk, which is to de-document association map acting on associations, in which case we don't need to have AssociationComap work on associations. And the other is we change the behavior of AssociationMap to separately apply to the key and the value, like it's been suggested that AssociationComap could do.
Doesn't seem all that useful. That just doesn't seem all that useful.
I think
What
that
doesn't seem all that useful?
that would break way too much code that exists already.
It's not that much code. I mean, it would definitely break code.
But I understand, but I just don't think it's. I mean, association map normally. I just don't think.
The normal usage is to construct an association from a list of keys.
I understand.
Right.
And so here, it seems like it should just do what map does, but I don't see. I mean, fails to give a valid association object, so it's really useless right now.
It's mostly useless.
Yeah. There are a handful of cases where it does give a valid association, like if you do
it's
reverse.
Really useful for like key value validation. So like if you have a function that checks a key and a corresponding value, you just want to make sure.
Well, then why don't you
Could
use
key value map work for that?
It would, but then it's awkward because you'd have to convert it back to an association after.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's essentially what you're doing anyway, right? But
okay, look.
But so
the safe thing to do is have AssociationComap just not work on an association for now.
And perhaps dedocument the association map working on associations.
Well, I mean,
because I scanned.
It has to return a rule, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. Otherwise, this can't work, right?
Right. So basically, you either need.
I mean, I think it should generate a message if it doesn't produce a rule.
If nothing else, yeah, a message would be good.
Right, but it's a completely different meaning than the association map on a list. So I really don't see why this thing exists. I mean, I think the only reason it exists is because Tali thought he needed a way to reverse values and keys.
And both use cases are useful. It's just awkward that they're under the same function.
Which both use cases?
So association map with a list is a second argument, and association map with an association is a second argument. They're two very different things, so it's weird that they're under the same function, but they're both very useful.
Having scanned the entirety of the code base in Stash for association map working on associations, like 80 or 90% of the uses of association map are on lists. And some reasonable fraction of the uses of association map, like half the use cases we found of association map on association, should have been map or key map, which would be way more efficient. So I'm not disputing that there are cases.
Okay, let me make some suggestions, okay? Thing number one, let's insert a message for this case, okay, if it isn't returning a rule, okay? Thing number two, I'm not sure we should tag this to possibly dedocument it in the next version, but at least, I don't know, I mean, maybe we don't need to dedocument it if, in fact, people are really using it for the thing it should be used for, which is to return a rule there. I mean, I'm confused because,
if you
normally
restrict F
it does
to
something
return
completely
a rule,
different, right? It does something where you're saying instead of F of key, it is introducing the value as a key, so to speak. Right?
It's like key value map, except it gives the key and value together as a rule instead of as two separate arguments to the F.
Yeah, one limitation of key value map is you don't know whether or not it was a rule delayed. Which is another reason why association map is useful.
How do you make a rule delayed here?
No, if you start with an association that contains a rule delayed in association map, your F can
Just
apply
distinguish
to the
between rule
rules
and rule delayed.
Yeah. It's applied to the rules, so it can
Yeah.
distinguish between rule and rule delayed.
It's very weird, as you say, that association map. This is association map meaning map onto whole elements of the association, as opposed to the other meaning of association map, which is create an association.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
And honestly, map association would have been a better name for the thing that creates associations. Wouldn't it?
I think so. Yeah. Because
Really?
the result is an association, right?
In the vein of like nest list.
I mean, I don't know that that's, well, maybe, but that's not obvious to me.
Okay, what are we going to do here? We've got several different things. First question is, what should AssociationComap do? Should it? I mean, I don't think it has any choice but to do the same as what Association Map does. So what we're doing is we're giving. Go ahead.
Well,
I
to
don't
be
think
clear,
that's
the
necessarily true, because if we did that thing up above to make it consistent, that will never be useful.
yeah, the consistent thing is definitely useless.
Right, because that's using rule as a head, a rule as a head.
Yeah, which is useless.
Unless unless that X, is some weird thing with up values for rule or something, which would
No.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. There's exactly one useful X, which is co-identity.
yeah,
which is in a packlet.
You'd have to bend over backwards to make that do anything useful.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So I think.
Hold on. So the question is, should AssociationComap do anything on associations? If it does anything, that's the most obvious thing for it to do right there.
But it's very inconsistent with what
Association map does.
So perhaps the right thing to do is for it to not do anything with associations, at least for now.
It does seem hard to imagine that you'd want to apply the key and the value to the same object. Really does seem hard to imagine. I think it should do nothing then. Right, so the actions here are make that do nothing. And for association map, let's at least generate a message when you're getting things that aren't rules out. Fair?
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's fair.
And then we can revisit this after we have a bit more experience with AssociationComap and so on.
There's also a reference page if you want to take a scan of it.
For what?
For AssociationComap.
For AssociationComap
I
to
doubt
include
it.
it in the next release if we want.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'll look at it better. Did the parallelized thing happen or not?
It will.
It's in queue. Yep.
MidDate.
Yep. So this is another function we talked about in ILD. There's again a futurized ref page. One of the things I came across in implementing it is that MidDate very closely mirrors MinDate and MaxDate, which both operate on a list of dates. And the question is, should MidDate also do that? And what should it actually do in that case? It's the generic case of MidDate is
I see.
I have a
MinDate
data.
and MaxDate are giving the actual min and max of the whole list of dates.
Correct.
Okay.
So what I implemented as a starting point is that MidDate will look at the midpoint or will look at the minimum value and the maximum value and give you the middle points. But that means it's only actually looking at 2 dates in the entire list, which is a little odd. We
Well, it doesn't know which dates to look at. I mean, min and max only look at one date in the list in the end.
Right.
They have to look at
Yeah.
everything to know what the order of elements is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's
that's
nonsensical.
particularly
It's just, you know, there are potentially different ideas of what the mid date of a list of
Well, you
dates
mean a
could
median
be.
date? Do we have a median date?
We don't, but median works on dates. So does mean, so does quantile, so does central figure. And they all give slightly different results. There's a properties in relation example here that shows the different results you can get for the same data set of dates.
Okay, hold on. Let's just understand. If we made it the median,
Mm-hmm.
and why are we not just using median for this? Do min and max work on dates? Yes,
Min
they
and
do.
max do, but there's a two argument. We also have min date and max date because we also want to be able to extract a minimum value from an individual date. If I have this year and I say I want the last day of this year, I can say max date of this year, comma day, and it will give me
Okay.
the last
So,
day.
so let me just understand. So if we had mid date be a median or something like this, the
Mhm.
fact is by the mid date of a single date is implicitly assuming a uniform distribution
Right.
because it's picking that. So the only consistent thing that I can see to do would be to imagine that all dates are intervals,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Each
Yep.
with a uniform distribution, each of equal weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could potentially ask for the median of that whole collection of little intervals. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, why is this useful? I think the main reason this type of thing is useful is that at some moment you're going to need to plot a single date on some timeline or something for some whole class of things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so I think having some weighting, statistical weighting, is not a terrible idea. But since we have no real information on what, I mean, if we did the median, does median take account of the extent of each date?
I believe median is looking at the starting value for each date rather than the full extent of the implicit.
I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's this question of, you know, in general, the simplest
Okay.
way to approach the granular dates is to take the start point.
I understand. I don't think we have the right people here to discuss this. What I would hope to be the case is that it is taking the, each date as a step function type thing, a distribution that has that structure. In which case I would suggest doing the same thing for mid date, unless we don't even have a thing called mid date, and call it median date. And I think mid date is the right term. Mid date is, and so in other words, for a single date, it's just the midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense?
Yep. And we have a third argument which allows you to say, I want, this to be a quarter of the way through.
Yeah, I get
et cetera.
it.
But, yeah,
but
the same
whereas
thing.
if there are multiple intervals,
Mhm.
it's, and I don't know how this works, the median of the intervals.
Yeah. So we'd basically treat a list of dates as a potentially discontinuous interval that has
Sure,
each
but
date
not
is-
only, but remember, if the date August 19th or something
Mhm.
is in 17 different dates,
Mhm.
even though they extend in different places, that will effectively define. So the distribution, what we're effectively getting is, what's the probability to hit a given date? Okay, it is a unit step function for the extent of every interval, but those unit steps pile up. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that it's cumulative where, when those intervals overlap,
Right.
we're adding weights to the overlap.
So, I mean, in particular, what we end up with is, let's see, is it uniform distribution?
Yep. And we do have Gosha here also.
Oh, we do. Well,
Yeah,
hello. So can you opine on this, please?
Hello. I'm just thinking. So somehow, because I mean, you're talking about interval in terms of granularity, if I understand correctly, such as joint, and that's kind of, it always worries me
Okay.
because,
Here's,
interval, it's a continuous kind of, chunk of time. While
okay,
with
so,
granularity, we're looking
yeah, I
at
get
as,
it.
as
Right,
some
that's
kind
a
of,
different issue. All right,
yeah.
so let's just plot. Is this going to work? Oh, for goodness sake.
No,
Why
no,
didn't
no. I
that
mean,
work?
no. If you want to sum the uniform distributions, you need to use transform distribution. In a
No,
nutshell.
why am I not doing just PDF of each of those distributions and then adding them up?
Oh, then you need to map over them. It's not listable in a distribution. It's listable in the values.
Okay, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is what I'm proposing. That okay. So this means it accumulates in some places, right? We're assuming, and you were discussing the granularity question, which is a different question, but I'm assuming that the issue is we have a function MidDate that is supposed to, for a single date, just gives you the midpoint. Now, what does it do with granularity when there's a midpoint? Is it midpoint?
So what it does is it,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it selects the midpoint if you're looking for the middle or whatever quantile you're looking for within there. And then it gives you the encompassing date of the granularity. So like there's some examples in the ref page of, I say I want the week that is the midpoint of today, yesterday, and tomorrow. That week may encompass the entire interval of the dates that are there because it's coarser than the sample. Or if I want the week that is 2/10 of the way through this year, that instant's going to fall on a particular day, and it will just mod out to the encompassing week.
Sorry, the thing that wasn't clear to me is if we do things at the level of that granularity, do we always get the same answer as doing it at instant level and then granularizing? I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, there are operations where the order of sampling and normalizing granularity does impact some calculations. If we're
like
saying
the
I
midpoint
want this,
calculation, I mean, if we've got a 10-day period and I just don't know, I can't think it through, and I do it by days, do I get the same answer for where the midpoint is as if I do it by, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you a sample input of, I have a bunch of dates that are from this year and I want to figure out what the midpoint month of them is. If we mod all of it out to months before we figure out the tally of, which is occurring most frequently or which is the midpoint, it can skew a little bit from if we did it by instant. If that instant happens to fall close to the boundary
We
between
should
two
calculate
dates.
with the granularity, shouldn't we? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, for individual dates, it doesn't matter. It's the same either way. If we're doing
Are you sure?
I am 90% sure, but I'd have to
I think we
go
should
back and check the math.
I'm not
Yep.
certain.
Yeah.
Okay. So for these, it could get really funky, right? Because I mean,
Right.
this distribution, given a granularity, we are just assuming that the date is uniform over its granularity range, whatever that is. Well, ultimately the range is specified by instance.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? So I mean, my proposal would be that we take the median of this distribution, of this aggregated distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I care? Why do I think this is important? I think this is important because I think people are going to end up with single points that summarize, when was the Second Peloponnesian War? I want a date. Let's use the MidDate.
Right. I mean, we run into this with, like I said, that in a lot of cases we reduce dates to the beginning instant, sometimes the end instant, sometimes we need a central instant to resolve things. We do this with calendar conversion because lots of calendars are closely aligned but a little offset at the beginning of a month. So if you convert this month to the Julian calendar, you'll get August. But if you convert in the middle of that month to the as an instant and then figure out what month that is, they're generally pretty well aligned.
All right, so listen, do you object to my idea of using median of this distribution?
I don't object. One alternative proposal we had is that we could have basically a method option that would let you control.
I think that would be nice.
Yeah, but I think we want to know what the default is. I think this is a sensible default.
Right. And I mean, method, arrow, like
we could say method
instant.
arrow. Yeah.
Method arrow. I don't know, individual instance. No. Let's see. Well, one thing is to take the individual midpoints. I mean, there are a bunch of different methods, which we could try to enumerate and then name.
Yeah. And you can also, you have the control to go and say, I have this collection of dates. I want to conform them to months and then do this operation, or I want to conform them to instants and then do this operation.
Okay.
Since we have Gosha here, I might jump slightly out of order and look at Z-score next. But a last question on this is, I periodically, when scanning code, keep mixing up MidDate and MinDate because they're one letter off and it's in the center. That may just be mild dyslexia on my part, but I wanted to at least bring it up in case you had any concern with that.
Well, I mean, the alternative will be median date. But I don't think we should do that. I think we should say middle date, mid date.
No, because median date might confuse is taking the median of the list of dates.
Yeah, that's true.
I very much prefer mid date.
Fine.
Okay.
All right, let's look at Z-score.
Yep. So this is something I think that has come up in a couple of cases, or it had come up in a couple of other meetings, and I asked Scotia about it, and she said, obviously for list cases, standardize already calculates Z-score, but this would be
does
kind
it?
of
What do you mean it does it?
It's on a list, so it does the operation on the whole list. So it's not, element by element. Which is
right. It's giving
sufficient.
the Z-scores for those elements, right?
Exactly, yes.
I think this is useful, but I think the argument order is wrong. Surely it should be more like a PDF or something, Z-score of list, X. Because then we could also put a distribution in there, couldn't we? Or is that's not stupid, is it?
You would want to standardize X by the mean and standard deviation of the distribution.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
seems reasonable to me.
Without a second argument, it'd just be standardize. It seems like it would. So if you didn't provide a second argument, you'd basically just get standardized, or would we say Z-score specifically needs 2 arguments?
I think it needs 2 arguments.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's either Z-score of a list, X, which is very similar to quantile of, not the same thing, but I mean, you get what I'm saying.
If we had an operator form of this, which one would be out?
Right.
The list, Z-score. If there was an operator form, we would want this.
Yes, that's for sure. I just want to point out that standardize also allows you to specify the functions. So in place of mean, you could put median, for example. So takes more arguments than just the list.
Well, in our modern methodology, we might want something like list, arrow, median there. Because then we can have an operator form as well. Not sure.
Not sure.
But z-scores are normally done with means and standard deviations, right?
Correct.
What's
Yes.
the name for the median analog of a z-score?
Well, so I don't know, but there is a median deviation that computes the deviation from the
I see.
median, and so you would, for example, have, you could theoretically do this with the medians and median deviation. But yeah, z-score would refer to the mean standard deviation. So we can start with that and see if the need arises for
Okay, let's
maybe
do z-score.
extension.
Z-score is something that people, it's a relevant thing. Okay, we're done with that. Can we, is this relevant? Is any of this relevant to Gosha?
Not immediately, no.
Okay. All right. Then
Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gosha.
see you later.
Bye.
So I have a ref page for it. We'd had a couple of questions the last time we looked at it, and I've done a bit of a dive into them and think settled on a pretty solid design, but there's a couple of questions to sort out. So the argument structure for generate password is very closely related to generate symmetric key, which also has method options and different parameters, but generate password's a little different because there's basically two schemes that we use, either character-based or word-based.
Okay, so can I run it?
Yep. So by default, it gives a password that is upper, lower, letter, and then a curated set of ASCII characters that are commonly accepted for passwords that typically don't violate password restrictions. Most passwords won't accept space bars.
Okay, let me ask a question here about security.
Yep.
I assume, what on earth is this doing in the cloud? When it generates this, how much, this really is between just the user and nobody's gonna, this is fine, I think.
Right.
It would be worth just somebody having a little bit of a computer security think about this. Just make sure that we
I plan on running it by the cloud team and potentially Christopher as well, just to sanity check
why don't we
everything.
also ask the folks who do computer security stuff under Jason?
Okay.
Just think whether there's anything we're missing in terms of somebody doing some crazy stunt. Okay, so what's the question here?
So the general question is, we spec'd out last time that there would be, you could provide a type as an argument, which is character or words. By default, it's characters. And then there's also a options structure that mirrors what we have in generate symmetric key, which lets you parameterize a bunch of things. And
so one thing people often want is they say you've got to have at least one number and one blah blah blah. So do we have the other thing we could do, a bit like we've done for some of the cryptography stuff, is just come right out and say, a password suitable for blah.
Yep. So what I did, so there's a little bit of an inventory slightly farther down the agenda, is I did an inventory on basically the 100 high, not in the ref page, but in the actual agenda. Basically an inventory on the 100 highest trafficked websites and what their password requirements are, and also what the NIST standards are. NIST basically says passwords need to be 8 characters long, and you shouldn't have any other restrictions, because the more restrictions you put on it, the harder it is for people to remember passwords. Standard minimum required length is 8. Some places require less, some places require more. And the required types there is basically a count of, if it's 1, it means it needs to include characters. It might need to include characters and digits. So if you want to look at, I don't have this scheme documented, but if you give a first argument
you would put that into WDR or something if that's
Yeah, we could do
kind of a
that.
cool piece of data. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you do generate password and the string robust is a name I just made up for a more robust words-based password. So this will generate 4 words long. It will alternate the case of the words. It will include a separator, and it will also pad it with characters and digits. So this is a robust but theoretically still memorable password that should pass.
Well, it's a bit weird. Yeah. Okay, fine. If all your passwords are this way, I suppose it might be memorable.
Yeah. And so there's different parameters. What I basically figured I would do is if we like this structure, I can make a WFR that has, password scheme data. And you can say, I want an NTLM compliant password. We'll say, okay, it needs to be at least this many characters long. It needs to include these things. I think.
Okay. I don't think we have the right people in this meeting to really get into this level of detail. I don't know enough about this. People in the Syscom team and so on are going to know about this. I do not.
Okay.
Right. Both trends and passwords and but I think, my suggestion would be, I think this is right to have a string here and to have various known things. And I think typical people, I mean, I don't know why we're not just basically going outright and just say, have a thing here that says quotes Netflix.
Yeah. Or you can say Apple ID there is another one I pre-programmed so that it meets Apple's requirements for a password. It also only includes characters that are typically available on the main screen or symbols that are on the main keyboard screen on a phone.
Yeah. This seems like the right thing to do, and just curate a bunch of these.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do a follow-up meeting with the Syscom and various security
and we should
folks.
also have a Wolfram ID, generate password for Wolfram ID, whatever we recommend is what that should do.
Yep, we follow the NIST standard, so it's minimum 8 characters and no restrictions beyond that. But
okay. Now, it's like speed limits. If it says 30 miles an hour, then some set of people say, even though the sign in the US at least says speed limit, right?
Right.
People take that as, oh, I should drive at 30 miles an hour. So when it says minimum 8 characters, it is not self-evident that means it should be 8 characters long.
Exactly. Yeah. So usually what I've used as the reference point is looking at maximum. So most password schemes limit you to no more than 32 characters, though many will accept 64. So we have our default 32 characters. That should not violate most password
What do you mean
schemes.
default? What's the default? What do you mean?
So most websites have a minimum length and also a maximum length.
I understand, but we're not taking the median, the min and max, or anything like that, right?
Our baseline is to do the most secure that's generally accepted. So there's a password length parameter. Its default value is 32.
Well, our default is right here, which is nothing like that long.
Right. It's 32 characters.
You are right. I don't recognize 32 anymore.
It's odd when they're symbols.
That's what you get for using proportional fonts.
Yes. Ethan is saying generate password add options specify length and/or length range and n words, n characters, and yeah, I think we have
those are all there. Yep. We also have, you can specify different dictionaries, different languages for dictionaries.
So one possibility would be to be able to have an association where we say words arrow 3.
Yep. So if you look at some of the examples in the ref page, we have a bunch of different parameters that include, this is that last one under basic is I want a random character string that doesn't include random characters or letters, and I want it to be 99 characters. So it's just numbers. Or I might want something that uses the French dictionary and minimum word length of 8.
Oh, I see. Here we go. Method characters. I see. But if you want to say I want 3 words, for example.
Yep. So that would be word count, which will be just slightly farther down.
Is method both an option to generate password and a key in the?
Yes, it is.
Is that the general thing? You can use these
Yeah.
as options or.
Yep. So that's kind of inherited from what's in generate symmetric key. So the main thing that's a little confusing is that some parameters apply to character passwords and some parameters apply to word passwords, but not that many apply to both of them. So the first set of parameters are all for character passwords, character-based passwords. It would be weird to generate a words-based password and say include letters goes to false.
Yeah, that's tough. Include common characters goes to false or true. It's, like bye-bye, or that's not, is that hyphenated? I don't know. Something which is hyphenated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's basically, I mean, a lot of password schemes will call, ampersand, exclamation point, pound, special characters, but we generally have a different notion of what a special character is.
I have to say, well, common characters I really don't like as a name.
Yeah.
That should really be symbols or something, symbol characters or something like that.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Or include non-letters.
Yeah, and so like by default, the character-based passwords will only use ASCII characters. NIST recommends you include Unicode characters, and there's a method, basically, there's an option to add extra characters. You can include Unicode characters or special characters if you want in the password corpus.
I think what Ethan is kind of suggesting here is, why isn't there something that just says, words arrow 2, characters arrow 75, capital letters arrow 12, etc. In other words, you're giving a set of specifications that are somewhat overlapping. Like if you say, you have to decide what gets precedence. If you say words arrow 3, characters arrow 14, that could be a constraint where you get 3 words and there's a total of 14 characters. That might be crazy, or it might mean something different. I think first step, word separators, Ethan is saying, would be n symbols or numbers. Mix them and control the number of each type.
Yeah, so that we do have parameters for that in here. Again, the ref page is kind of long because there's lots of parameters and the way they interact is nuanced. Yeah, you might want to pull from a different dictionary. You might want to separate the words. You might want to capitalize the words differently.
Can we please pass this by some people who do password stuff a lot? Because I just don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't know to what extent. It's almost like kind of something where you just say, here's my inventory of stuff that I want in this password. 3 digits, 4 symbol characters, etc., etc., etc. I don't know whether that's how to specify it, or whether you want to be doing things like include symbol characters and so on.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right, we'll take a pass with those groups.
Okay.
And we have Oliver and Rob here to talk about spline, some things that came out of looking at a large collection of numerics related WFRs. That these were a couple of things that Oliver thought were potentially interesting.
Okay. So what are we talking about here? Can you describe what the function does?
Yeah, so basically this function gets a couple of points and returns a B-spline curve, and my understanding of what the submission is.
In this case, getting 5 points, right?
Yeah. And
control points of some kind.
Yeah, and my interpretation of this is that the customer wanted a interpolating function that passes through these points, and it's currently not possible to specify this directly with interpolation. So that's a potential idea.
I thought interpolation did pass through the points, but not with a
but not
cubic
as a
curve.
spline.
Yeah, right. Seems like a useful thing to have. I mean, it seems completely useful. I mean, interpolation generically, given these points,
so the problem interpolation function has is that some of the coordinates, the first coordinate are duplicate, and it can't deal with that right away. But that's something we could look at.
Interpolation was set up to have a set of coordinates, and then interpolate over those set of coordinates. So B-spline, the sort of B-spline curve thing, I mean, you could have a curve interpolation or something, which would be a different command where that could make sense. I mean, don't we already have a B-spline function?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, there's a B-spline curve. Right.
Yeah, that's what's been used in the repository function to mimic this, basically.
I'm confused. So this thing here, okay, and if I say graphics of that, get a squiggle, right? So the issue is, can you get something which behaves like this out of interpolation? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
that's my understanding of this request.
And you should be able to. Right. So normally interpolation here is going to give you, if I say interpolation of that, what the heck? What is that? Oh. What?
So it uses the first point
Messages use input form.
What are you saying?
The 0 with the backtick is from input form.
No, I understand, but why does this is interpolating two-dimensional points, but they don't.
No. It's a 1D interpolation. So the first point is the coordinate, and the second point is the value.
Oh, so what is being asked for here? I mean, you're interpolating a function. So what I don't understand. There's a function. I'm totally confused. Okay, walk me through what the heck we're talking about.
The customer would like to have an interpolating function that passes through these points that's made out of spline.
Okay, but there isn't a way to do that.
What argument would you give the function?
Yeah, I don't understand. It's a parametric curve or what? Look, if you give an x coordinate, it's a multi-valued function at many points. Right, so I don't understand how that can win. I mean, to me, there's a different question, which is I've got all of these. Okay, here's what I would think one was wanting. Okay, I have these points. Let's say I have an intrinsic coordinate that runs from 0 to 1 along the curve, and I want to pick points along this curve. How do I do that right now? See what I'm saying? I've got a B-spline curve. How do I pick the point that is 15% of the way along that curve?
Arc length.
How?
You have to know the arc length computation. That's not trivial. Even for approximating, it will take work.
Well, but how do I get to the part-way arc length?
Right. How do you get the... Now, arc length might help you, but it's not going to move anywhere along the point unless B-spline curve. I don't remember if B-spline curve takes a second a parameter in the second argument that tells you where, right? I mean, Stephen's asking a different question of how do I find, you know, the point arc length 3 into the B-spline curve.
Yeah.
Stephen is saying 15%. I'm saying 15% of what?
The distance along the intrinsic
coordinate. One possible way to do it would be...
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
One possible way to do it that would make sense for interpolation is for each of those points. You could have, 0 would be associated with 0, 0. 1 would be associated with 1, 2. 2 would be associated with 1, 3.
That makes
3
sense.
would.
That makes sense.
And then between 0 and 1, we give you a thing on the first sense. So basically, you'd have then there is a form of interpolation that takes list points, and then that could use the B-spline method. That would actually make sense.
Okay, but that's complicated because normally interpolation, if I just give single values to interpolation, it will, as you say, include 1, 2, 3, assume 1, 2, 3, 4 as the x coordinates, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
And for B-spline, that might not be the right default. The right default might be to go between 0 and 1 and assume, parameterized by arc length fraction.
Is it the same function as interpolation? I mean, it's a function where, look, here's a way to do it.
Because we do allow lists for
the output.
The output of interpolation.
Yeah, but isn't it really this? Isn't it really 1, comma that?
Yes. Yes.
2, comma this.
Right.
Rick is putting something in the chat here.
Another question is whether or not arc length is the right parameterization if the curve has some regions that are particularly flat interspersed with sharp corners. Then you might want to.
Hold on, we're not to that yet. We're trying to deal with the syntax here. The issue is this thing here makes sense, but I don't understand how you tell it that you want. If you've got a list of pairs, how does it know that those are not XY pairs?
Right, it doesn't, which is why
interpolation does know that. It has a way of processing the data to decide.
Well, no, it didn't know that when in the example Steve gave, right, below the graphics, right?
In that case, it can't know. But if you put in the parametric coordinates explicitly, then it knows.
What do you mean? These are parametric coordinates. What are we saying?
I mean, if you write what you wrote above and give interpolation explicitly, it knows that.
Obviously, it knows
right. But that's kind of obnoxious, right? Like it would be nice to just take your list of points and say interpolate through these points, which I don't think interpolation can do.
I don't think interpolation can do that properly. You'd have to, So
okay, so let's
have to be a different function.
No, wait a second. Interpolation normally goes through the points. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So the issue here is that in this case here, interpolation, but for the input syntax, so this case here, right? Let me draw it out.
Right, which would be exactly what n of 23 is, right?
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, so this interpolation here is a fine and dandy interpolation. If what I say here is plot, what do I want to do? I want to say parametric plot.
Yeah.
A %24 of t. T goes from 1 to 5.
Yep.
And there I have it. Okay, with a kink up there, which I don't understand, because what's the default for interpolation? So if I say here, interpolation order arrow 0, I should expect to get piecewise linear pieces.
Yeah.
You want to give that to the interpolation, I believe.
Okay. And if I now say interpolation order arrow 4 or something, it'll be smooth as could be.
Right. Well, actually, I mean, it's the spline conditions that make it smooth in the B-spline case.
No, but okay, but in this case, it does go through the points, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, all cases should go through the points.
All right, so fine. So the issue here is that there's a spline interpolation, which is this one here, right? And the spline interpolation is not the same as that interpolation there.
I
No.
think if you give method goes to spline in the interpolation, it will give you the same thing.
Okay, dandy. So what are we talking about here? I don't understand. This seems to work.
Right. Well, I think the point is that is the obnoxious input syntax. So
we might be able to futz around it using list interpolation. I'm not sure.
I mean, do we want to do something crazy like support line and interpolation, and that means take out the points and...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that we want interpolation of line and B-spline and so on.
And that would just implicitly run from 0 to 1 over the line or curve.
Well, I mean, we might want an option, right? Right, like parametric plot and you know, color function, right? They have options of, do you normalize from 0 to 1, or do you look at the raw value? So we might want both the option to the interpolation goes from 0 to 1, or it goes from 1 to length of points.
Yeah, so how is the thing scaled right now? Is it scaled by arc length?
No, it's going to be scaled by, you know, by
the number of points.
By the number of points.
Well, I mean, between two neighboring points.
But list interpolation is the function that allows you to give the range.
So you could have done all this with list interpolation, or is list interpolation yet another function?
The list interpolation is an existing function.
Right. Well, yes, it sounds familiar. But the question is list interpolation the thing where we took interpolation and added an index, or is it yet another function?
No, it allows you to specify the ranges, the variables.
Yeah, it's a data range
the
option.
Array, it's the array and the coordinate. And so this, I mean, list interpolation of just those points with method goes to spline should just work.
Okay, well, let's try and find out.
I mean, it may not.
But look. To me, the obvious thing to do would be to have something where you could say, I mean, the kind of polite syntax would be something like interpolation of B-spline curve of this, or line of that. That returns a function.
Is that B-spline function?
That's a graphics primitive. Like line is a graphics primitive.
Yeah, that
but there's also a function. There's also a head B-spline function. Is Jose's question?
What is B-spline function? Oh gosh,
it's a function from 0 to 1.
It's exactly this.
It's exactly what we're talking about. That's
except it's from 0 to 1, right? Rather than the
right.
This seems like a very confused thing. I wish this had been more carefully vetted before we got to this meeting. This just seems really confused.
Well, and I honestly don't think, you know, maybe this is just my view, but the automatic coordinates, you know, being the range of the length of the data is not that useful.
What is that? What is that? I don't understand that.
Oh, because it's interpreting that as an array. So the default is for it to interpret it as an array.
Okay.
So yeah, without a little bit of doctoring list interpolation, that's why I said I wasn't sure. It probably wouldn't, because its tendency
Okay,
is
so
to
what are we
interpret
talking
things as
about here?
array.
What are we talking about? Let's clarify again. What are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that somebody didn't read the documentation, or what are we talking about here? We're talking about the fact that what we're doing, what we want, is somebody gives a bunch of points, and they have a parameter. We don't even know what the parameter is supposed to represent. Is it 0 to 1, or is it 1 to n, or what is it? And they expect to get a thing that goes through those points, which they can totally easily achieve with B-spline function. B-spline function is giving them precisely what they want, if I'm not mistaken, right? Am I wrong here?
I think you're correct.
So I think this is just a confusion. I mean, this is one of these things where we may need more C alsos or something somewhere, but that seems like it's about the level of it. Oliver, are we missing something?
No, I think it's fine. Yeah. I think
Okay.
I
So
agree.
this shouldn't have come to this meeting in this form. This doesn't make sense. I'm complaining here. So Nick, I don't know if you're the one who's
No, I'm the one.
Okay. So
Yeah,
please,
we
let's
ran it by
make sure
everyone,
that
but I
these are
didn't run it by Jose, and Jose gets the cookie for being the one person out of all
Well, and
of us that remembered.
it's maybe I should have. I mean, Oliver sent me something, and I just didn't have
all
a
right.
chance.
Okay, what is this?
So this is something I think we don't actually have, in part because
Yep.
I've never heard of a Kima spline.
Yeah, I think, Oliver's note initially when we looked at this, and Danny also, the interesting part of the Akima spline is that it can handle duplicate ordinate coordinates.
Okay. So, I mean, it's just another spline method, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
So you're not familiar with the Kima spline either?
No, never heard of them before.
Bob Nachbar is the expert.
Okay. Well, I mean, it seems like a fine thing to implement, particularly if we already have an implementation in WFR. It's just like, I mean, there's an argument here that if we generate that message, that we should make sure that we say in that message, use a schema spline if you want this. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
I don't know enough about this field to know. I mean, if Akima splines are identical to ordinary splines, except that they deal with repeated coordinates, then maybe we should just generalize the spline method. If it gave an error before, right, if it just failed in this case, and if it's going to give the same results if they're not degenerate, then maybe we just make the spline method be this method.
Well, wouldn't the B-spline thing work fine for that?
B-spline here, is that a method?
No, not an interpolation, but the B-spline function we just talked about.
For this thing with duplicate coordinates.
Yeah.
But quite possibly it does. Listen, guys, you need to unscramble this, okay? The decision tree is, can we generalize spline in a compatible way so that it can deal with degenerate coordinates? If yes, we just do it. If no, and we have to introduce this Akima thing, then we make sure we have an error message that says when you are bumped out because spline can't deal with degenerate coordinates, that it tells you use Akima instead. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move
Wouldn't
on.
the automatic method just go to Akima in that
Yes,
case?
I think absolutely so.
Okay.
If it's using splines, if the automatic method is using splines, for goodness sake, use something which can deal with the degenerate case.
So this is this basically exists. There is you can so in this case
What's this? What are we?
So this user has a set of coordinates and wants to interpolate over those coordinates, and you can do that already today.
Okay, so why are we talking about this in this meeting? I don't understand. If this just read the documentation or something,
yeah.
Why are we talking about it here? I don't understand. What this is not what this meeting is for. If there is a new function or something that we think is worth introducing, that's what this meeting is for. Is there a new function that we think is worth introducing?
Well, Oliver, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the point that this exists, but it exists in the ND-solve FEM context.
Well, that's
Yeah,
wrong.
that's a different
That doesn't
thing.
mean it exists. If it's not a
No,
system
hold on.
function-
It exists. You can use interpolation today with this data set. So you just have, the way to do it today is you use interpolation, you give the coordinates, and you partition the values at those coordinates and make this a joint list so that you have a three, each list, sublist has 3 components, and then you can do the interpolation of that. So just let me,
I'm totally
I'll send you the code. Just hold on a
Okay,
second.
no, I don't want the code. I want to know, okay, I think the problem here is that Oliver hasn't been involved in enough of these meetings.
So the first, never.
Okay, fine. The purpose of these meetings is to discuss potential new system functions. If that is what you are proposing, this is the meeting.
I'm not proposing anything here.
So what is this? Is this some comment somebody made?
So I've been asked to comment on these Wolfram function repository functions, and that's what I made.
Okay, fine. Then you were misinformed, because that's not what this meeting is for. If this meeting is, do you think that there is something that is inspired by some function repository function that should become a system function? If yes, bring it here. If no, don't. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So let me ask again. Is there something in what's here that you or anybody else believes? Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm sure Oliver can speak for himself. I don't know. Nick, was there something you thought was worth promoting somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the interpolation code. We basically, the triage that got here was Danny and various people go over the initial lists. Then Danny and I go over and refine the list, try and figure out who's responsible for that particular content area.
Okay.
We send them the things, say what's interesting, what would actually be worth promoting.
Stephen, I think you're kind of, lodging yourself a little bit prematurely in poor Oliver's throat on this.
Okay.
So we think or thought that this polygon interpolation might be a sensible function to have in system context.
Okay.
Oliver here as someone with expertise who can comment on it. Now, if he's saying, well, it shouldn't be, that's fine. I'm happy to have him veto it. But his expertise really needs to be a bit more welcome on this.
Okay, so fine. But so let me understand what this function does.
I mean, he's not the one proposing it. That's what I want to make clear. But
okay,
he
so
certainly
what it does is it takes a polygon, and what's vals here?
So that's a function that's evaluated at those coordinates.
Okay, so at the coordinates of the vertices of the polygon.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a function over the polygon, and this is a particular point in the polygon.
Correct.
And you are defining, it's sort of a piecewise defined function where the piecewiseism is over the polygons.
Yeah, I don't know how it's implemented, but I assume that's something like that.
But to me, this is like, the general version of this would be some kind of simplicial complex where.
So if you look in the chat, there's a small code snippet that does this today.
Okay, but that's not the point here. The point here is this. We are presumably going towards something where we can have simplicial complexes like we have meshes, right?
Yes.
But when you have a mesh, let me ask this question. This is very basic FEM stuff. Okay, when you have a mesh, the whole point is to define a function over that mesh.
Correct.
How do the values of the function? You can clearly define function values at the vertices of the mesh, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
But how do you typically do this? How do you typically define a function over the mesh? Is that how you do it?
So you create the mesh, you extract the coordinates, you evaluate the function, and you put it into an interpolating function.
Okay. So in general, the function that we could have here is or maybe we already have it, is what you're saying is element, that what you've got said there is element mesh interpolation.
So that function takes the mesh and the function evaluated at the coordinates. But what we could also have, if you want something new, is evaluate on mesh, something like that. So
right, that's what we're talking about. Right.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. We're saying what you've got is you have a mesh. So when you have a mesh, when we have a mesh, is the mesh just geometry, or is the mesh function values on geometry?
No, it's just geometry.
So how do you make something which is function values on geometry?
Well, you apply the function to the coordinates of the mesh.
But then what structure represents the function
The
on
order
the
of the coordinates.
But it's not, the coordinates disembodied isn't going to do it. I mean, in other words, it's just like on a graph, for example. We have a little bit of a messy story of annotations. I mean, do we have annotations on meshes as well? We do, don't we?
I think so.
Didn't you build them?
Okay,
no. So here's what I would assume. If you want a function on a graph, you annotate every vertex of the graph with the value of the function at that vertex. Make sense to people so far? Right? I would assume you can do the same thing with a mesh. That is, you annotate a mesh with function values.
Why would a mesh store that? But that's an interpolation what you want.
Because it's a mesh, just like a graph with values, you can have a mesh with values, presumably. I'm pretty sure we have that capability.
And some of the some of the meshes have. I mean, I don't know if you can annotate with arbitrary things. Well, presumably you can, right? I mean, of course you can annotate with anything. The question is that useful for anything?
Right. So I'm saying the thing that I can see being useful, because it's a generalization of this polygon interpolation, is you have a mesh, and I mean, this seems obviously useful. You have a mesh, and at every vertex in the mesh, you assign a value of some function or some collection of functions. And then I don't know how you specify a spatial point, because an arbitrary spatial point won't be in the mesh, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
So how do you specify
you're
a place
interpolating
on the mesh?
So you find the element which contains that coordinate, and then you interpolate.
I see. So in other words, if I had a 2D mesh
Yeah.
that was a sphere, for example, okay, and I've got all the values on that sphere, and then I ask for the interpolated value at the center of the sphere, what would happen?
So you have a 2D thing embedded in 3D, okay?
That's correct. So, and I've specified on the mesh, which is in the shape of a sphere.
Don't have that capability. So typically, you if you have 2D embedding in 2D region 2D, then you can do the evaluate on mesh. So that basically you're asking for solving stuff over surfaces, like PDEs over surfaces. That would require something like that, and we don't have that.
Okay, I think
you're basically saying use those points on the surface as corners of a 3D mesh, not a 2D.
That's like a convex hull or something like that.
All right, okay, fine. Yeah. So, but all right, but so if it's a 2D mesh,
yeah,
if I make, if I say something like, is it discretized region or region?
Discretized region. Disk, yeah.
Okay, there I go. Okay, so let's assume each one of those has a numerical ID. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so in principle, I could spray function values onto this. Correct? Yeah. So if I were to have a scalar field in this region, that would effectively be associating a scalar field value with every node, every.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do I if I've just done that, and how do I put a scalar field? What do I do to define that scalar field on that region?
So you extract the coordinates from the mesh, and you evaluate that scalar function.
Yeah, okay. That's not a nice thing to do. How do I put them back?
You plug them in interpolating function.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, and maybe it doesn't make any sense, without going through PDE apparatus, because there's nothing to do with the PDE.
No, it's nothing to do with PDEs. Forget about PDEs. No PDEs here.
Well, but okay.
So I mean, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see something like that, what you have in mind. So just a little bit up again, there is this. So this is so element mesh interpolation is it gets a mesh and it gets the values that are on these coordinates and it creates an interpolating function.
Okay, I
So
understand.
that's one function that we could have, because interpolation currently doesn't work with that way. So and the second thing is one step higher, is basically evaluate on mesh. So you have a function f, and you give a mesh, and then it creates the interpolating function. Without this doesn't do this f apply mesh coordinates monkey business.
Right, which you shouldn't need to do. I mean, in other words, it should be able to, given a mesh, you should just be saying,
right. I mean, I'm not disputing that such a function makes sense, but in the spirit of interpolation, this is the way to do it.
Right, I understand. But what about region interpolation? If I want to do the same thing, if I have a region, forget whether it's been meshed or not.
Yeah.
I have a region. Does that work already? I have a region and
No.
I have a function.
No.
Okay,
no. This is purely numeric. What you're seeing is purely numeric.
Well, okay, but I mean, what seems useful to me, maybe, is something like region interpolation of a region, or a mesh for that matter, and a function.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's the right name. And that returns an interpolating function that interpolates that f over that region.
Correct. Yeah.
But now how do I get, if I have, x squared or something, and I want to make an interpolating function over that for I want to make that thing. I mean, right now I would just say, table x squared, x01.
You evaluate the function on the coordinates of the mesh. I don't. Why is that? Why is that hard to understand? I mean, why do you think is that problematic?
I'm asking right now, if I wanted to get this, right? If I wanted to make an interpolating approximation to x squared, I would do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, but that's not on a region, really. I mean,
I know it's not on a region. I know it's on a region.
Fine. Yeah, you do that. Okay, good.
Right. So I'm saying what this would generalize this to. I'm just making sure I understand this case. This is the edge case, right? What this would generalize to, it would say region interpolation, or it could say, it could even say function interpolation, which we have. What does function interpolation do?
Function interpolation is an ancient disaster.
Don't
go there.
However, right now what you can do is you can do
that.
You get those values, you can use that same old list interpolation, but instead of giving the ranges, you can give the region as the second argument.
Well, what about this? What about function interpolation of f comma region? Why wouldn't that just work? And that returns an interpolating function. Seems like that would
probably be made to work.
Yeah, that's doable.
And that seems like a useful thing to have.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we get function interpolation out of the garbage heap. Function interpolation does exactly what I wanted up here. That was why I was asking this question. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Right. So I think function interpolation of f comma region seems to me to make perfect sense. And that actually could also be Okay. All right. I think we got a plan here. Let's see if we can just hit this very last thing for just one moment here.
Yeah, so this was something that Jose noticed in looking at, I guess there'd been a discussion in the tabular meeting about discard, which is basically inverse of select. And thinking about that, we were wondering
This is not a stupid idea.
Yeah, it's analogous to take drop. And we may also want to have discard first and key discard as, again, sister functions.
Possible too. This is an interesting idea.
Do we have the cases analog yet?
I mean, we have delete cases, obvious.
No, I'm sorry. analogous to take drop, not just to drop.
To cases, delete cases? I don't believe so.
Oh, you mean cases, delete cases?
Right.
Yeah, good luck on naming that one. Split cases.
Oh, well, gosh. Reap and sow, kind of, but that's.
This function would be quite similar to gather by.
Or separate cases, but yeah, it is a little similar.
Yeah. I need to get going. All right, we made good progress here, and I'm glad we managed to get function interpolation out of Rob just saying it's a disaster function.
Okay.
Now it has a it was a good idea at the time. It just was 20 years too early.
Maybe so.
Was it 20 years?
Yeah, 20 years.
Thought it was more.
It is.
No, it's fewer, slightly fewer than 20 years.
Wait. 1996.
No, almost 30 years.
30 years.
I knew it.
30. Oh, see, I'm losing track.
Yeah.
I keep thinking the 80s were 20 years ago, not 40 years ago. So stuck in the 2000s.
And maybe we'll even figure out a name for the first decade of the.
It's just today going forward.
It's the aughts, but yeah. I understand it's the aughts. But if you want to write it out, I have so many times I've needed to clarify that. You know, the 2000s. I don't know what the heck to say. I end up saying the first decade of the 2000s or something. Anyway, okay. Thanks very much. See you all soon.